So we will have a session now called Linear Dynamics and Local Disruptions. We have 3 speakers for this session. Actually, we only have 1 speaker in vivo here, which is Charline Kopf, who will speak as a 3rd person. But we're actually very happy that we have 2 speakers who are actually currently on the continent. So we have David Drenk, who is a scholar from Germany, but who is actually doing field work as we speak in Ivory Coast. So he's joining us online from there. And then we will have Shehu Tijjani Yusuf, who is a scholar based in Nigeria. So we have the Nigerian online connection. And then we will have Charline Kopf from the University of Oslo, who will speak as a 3rd speaker, and she will be here. So she will be sitting very lonely here in the fauteuil for the for the question and answer round, which will be led by Jonathan Kane, who is also online and joining us from the UK. People who all wanted to be here, but I think it's also very nice that we have this online connection, because it's all about thinking about across borders. So in a sense, this is actually what this whole thing is about.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shehu Tijjani Yusuf from the Department of History, Bayero University in Kano, Nigeria. I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this conference, particularly Professor Johan Lang, for inviting me to present my paper titled Lived Experience and Responses to Railway Technology in Gimi, Dangora and Madobi in northern Nigeria from 1908 to 1967. This presentation is the outcome of the research I conducted during my PhD. And the villages I'll be looking at are just 3 of the 8 villages which I look at during my research. And I want to say that these 3 villages are the most important railway centers, rural railway centers along the line between Kano, Zaria, and Kano. The research was based on in-depth oral interview, archival research, innovative sources such as songs, poems, European travel account, and extant literature. The communities that I'll be looking at, that is Gimi, Dangora, and Madobi, they are partly situated in 2 different emirates, that's Zaria and Kano, Zaria Emirates and Kano Emirates. Gimi is situated in Zaria Emirates, while Dangora and Madobi are situated in Kano Emirates. With the exception of Dangora, the other 2 villages were pre-colonial settlements, which means that they have been in existence before the advent of British rule. Dangora, on the other hand, was established in the 20th century, particularly during the construction of the rail line. According to interview I conducted in that village, it was said that during the construction of the rail line, there were thefts of railway materials at the present location of Dangora, and the local village head of a village nearby, about 3 kilometers away, was directed to relocate to Dangora to oversee, to put eyes on the construction materials. And over a period of time, people migrated to that area. And by the time railway station was constructed, was established in that area, Dangora became an important railway hub. In terms of economic activities, the people in these 3 villages were generally agriculturalists. Some people engage in trading, while some engage in craft works like blacksmithing, weaving, and pottery, and what have you. Next slide, please. Next slide. By 1900, the British formally imposed its former rule over the northern Nigerian area. Prior to this period, the northern Nigerian area was under the control of a British mercantile chartered company known as the Royal Niger Company. By the end of the 19th century, the Royal Charter of Royal Niger Company was invoked, and the British formally imposed its rule over the northern Nigeria. Prior to this period, the coastal parts in the southern part of the country had been conquered. They started with the conquest of Lagos colony in 1861, and thereafter the Oil River states were also conquered. The British government, it is important to note that not all the communities in northern Nigeria had been conquered during this early period. As far as the British influence was concerned, its influence over the whole northern region was quite limited, because it was limited to only those areas that are around the river Niger. It was only by 1903 that all other communities in northern Nigeria were effectively effectively come under the British influence. Next slide, please. I can't see the slides. Okay. The British interest in northern Nigeria, just like in other parts of the country, was economic reason. And it was based on imperialist motive to exploit cotton, mineral resources, and as well as to establish a ready market for finished goods from Britain. So in order to achieve this, the new colonial authority in northern Nigeria put in place new economic policies such as land, labor, currency, forced labor, cash crop production, and including importation of finished goods, which together affected the existing social relation of production in the region, with much consequences on the people. The northern Nigeria region need to be opened up to the modernizing influence of the British rule. The region had no modern transport. The region was landlocked, although it does have two main rivers, that is River Niger and River Gimi. But the two rivers were not navigable for large ocean-going vessels. And added to this was the fact that the northern administration was also financially insolvent, and it was forced to depend on imperial treasury and granting aid from the more buoyant Lagos colony and the southern Nigerian protectorates. Next slide. The need for the railway. In 1901, the Northern Authority proposed to build a northern railway. I use the word northern railway, not just a railway. They proposed to build a northern railway. And this railway was conceived independent of the already existing railway in the Lagos colony. Like I pointed out earlier, the Lagos colony was the first part to be conquered by the British, and Lagos colony was the first part of the country that had its own railway, known as the Lagos Government Railway. The actions and utterances of the authority of the Lagos colony shows that they saw the northern region as their own natural port, and as such wanted to extend their railway as far as Kano, which the northern authority were against. The southern protectorate, on the other hand, did not have a railway, but it planned to have one, and possibly to extend such rail line as far as Kano, which the northern authority was against. So the three provincial authorities engaged in unnecessary frictions, which dragged up until 1907. Sorry, I use, in my slide, you see 1906, but it's 1907, which dragged until 1907. By 1904, the Northern Authority, led by Frederick Lugard, decided to collaborate with the British Cotton Growing Association, BCGA, when it realized that the issue of the proposal of the railway was dragging unnecessarily. So it decided to collaborate with BCGA. The BCGA is a British company. It's a British company that is made up of people with vested interest in the Lancashire textile industry, and they were on the lookout for cotton. particularly because of the problem they face from the United States. So they want to reduce the over-dependence of the Lancashire industry on raw cotton supply from US. So they were looking for a new source in British West Africa and Nigeria. And Nigeria presented them with that opportunity. So the Northern Authority now informed the BCGA about the cotton potentiality in Northern Nigeria, and that the only problem that may prevent the exploitation of cotton in the region was the absence of modern transportation. The BCGA promised the Northern Authority to take the issue before the British government, which they did. By 1907, the British government approved the construction of the rail line from Barrow to Kano. And immediately after the line was approved, preparation was made towards the construction. Preparation was made towards the construction. Labor were recruited forcibly. The assumption in most literature on the railway, on Nigerian railway, is that the opposition towards labor recruitment did not go beyond mere protests. But new evidence shows that the labor recruitment, the construction works, and the materials that were brought in for the work were seen by the people as a sublime which produced mixed reactions of fear and wonder. A popular Hausa song, which is not a popular Hausa song, which was composed by the Emir of Zaria, probably in 1908, shows that the Northerners did not understand what this whole railway construction was all about. The railway, according to the source, it turns the Northern Nigeria upside down, and it created an aura that the people were not used to, so which produced mixed reactions of fear and wonder. But of course, these reactions were just for a while, because as the people understood what the railway work was all about, many people voluntarily made themselves available for the work. The construction work started in 1908, and it started in 1908 in Niger province. By the beginning of 1910, it entered the next province on the rail line, which was Zaria province. By the middle of 1910, it entered the last province on the rail line, which was Kano province. It was during this period in 1910, between 1910 and 1911, that Dangora was established, because the construction work entered the Kano territory in 1910. So between 1910 and 1911, that was when Dangora was established. The construction work eventually entered Kano metropolis in 1911, and it was open to traffic in 1912. The construction of the rail, it was open to traffic in 1912. And the opening of the rail line had impacts on these smaller villages. For one, many people still, the railway, produce mixed reactions, contrary to the impression in most literature that Nigerians appropriated the railway immediately after it was opened to traffic. New sources, the Worker Digger, which I earlier mentioned, songs, and European travel account shows that many Nigerians are in these areas did not understand what the railway, what train, locomotive, and the sounds, did not understand what it was all about. So it produced mixed reactions of fear and wonder. And these mixed reactions was also for a while, for as the people understood what this development was all about. Many people appropriated the train in order to better their life. The railway provided them with a cheaper and new means, faster means of traveling, and it cut down the travel time, which also led to increased mobility in the villages. The people also learned to structure their livelihood around the arrival of passengers' trains. In these villages, the arrival of passengers' train was one of the stimuli which galvanized the people into action. Whenever a train was arriving, you see people from the villages and the environs were rushing to bring their goods to sell to passengers on train. Not only that, traders in the community also appropriated the new transport system to also bolster their trading activities. Traders, the Nigerian Railway operated different train services. For one, there was a what you call a local train known to the people as Warwaro. It was a local train which was operated between Kano and Zaria. This train stopped at all the villages and it moves. There were about 3 of such trains which moves daily. There was also a long distance train which moved from Kano to the south. This type of train was operated twice in a week and it stopped at only the major railway town, including these 3 important railway towns. So the former was the most important to the local people because it stopped in the villages daily. So they structured their livelihood around the arrival of this train. And as a result of the activities of the train, many local people from these villages equally became employed on the railway. Apart from this, one important development of the activities of this railway was the development of cash crop production, particularly groundnuts. The groundnut, particularly groundnut, it also led to immigration of traders who came in order to cash out in the new groundnut economy. These trading firms largely concentrated their activities at Madobi, concentrated at Madobi, and the people responded by growing the crop. They responded by growing the crops. The railway also stimulated production in faraway areas, in areas far away from the rail line, which it was unable to exploit. But crops from such areas were brought to the station through by animal transport and sometimes by human porterage. So the people made money from this groundnut production. And part of the money they made were invested on their children, and they also used part of it to buy European products, and some also use it to take new wives. One important development of this period was the immigration of southern Nigerian migrants into this area. These migrants were mostly Christians from southern Nigeria. They also came to these villages in response to the opportunity created by the railway and the European trading firms by the European trading firms. And surprisingly, this trading firm, this migrant, equally, many of them equally settled at Madobi. The reason why they settled at Madobi was because most of the trading firms were settled at Madobi. So staying at Madobi provided them with multiple opportunities, which cannot be sacrificed for going to Gimi or Dangora. And the presence of this migrant equally led to emergence of new settlement patterns. On the one hand, you have the main traditional settlement, and on another hand, you have the settlement which was inhabited exclusively by the migrant. And this settlement was situated near the railway stations. Already you have the railway workers who are also situated near the railway station. And this area where the migrant was situated was the economic nerve of the village. It was the economic nerve of the village because that was where the trading firms are situated. So this area attracted many people, which eventually led to expansion of the villages. By 1967, when the Nigerian Civil War broke out, many Southerners had decided to flee to their hometown. The Nigerian Civil War was a war that was fought between the Nigerian government and the Eastern Nigeria, which wanted to secede from the Nigerian Federation, which the Nigerian government was not happy about. So during the Civil War, the people from Eastern Nigeria, particularly Igbos, were the subject of attack across the northern Nigeria. And it is important to note that this Civil War disrupted normal train service. It disrupted the cash crop, the cash crop production and export rate. The Igbo happen to be the large bulk of people who works in the Nigeria Railway. The train drivers, the technicians, the laborers, and the middle staffs were mostly of Igbo extractions. So during the Nigerian Civil War, the Civil War distracted normal train services and this cash crop export trade, which affected this community. And another one important surprising development of this period was the fact that the activities of this railway also stimulated crimes, particularly theft of railway keys and iron. These railway keys were often removed from the line by force, and the keys were used to forge farm implements. Apart from this, it also stimulated train robberies on the rail line. And this crime were products. This crime were responses to the changes that were brought about by the British policies, which affected the social relation of production, which undermined the living condition of the people and forced them into theft and robberies. The crime took the colonial authorities unaware. Attempt to stem the crime by policing the railway failed, and it pushes the perpetrators the more. Arrests and prosecutions were often made, but it never deterred the perpetrators. Even railway workers were implicated. The crime continued because of the existence of large market for stolen goods. The Nigerian Railway was forced into appeasing the perpetrators of the keys and slippers by selling its scrap iron to blacksmiths. The presence of railway police on train also did not deter the perpetrators, the robbers, because it did not deter the robbers. And at any rate, the crime continued through the post-colonial period. In conclusion, the railway was built to stimulate cotton, but it stimulated groundnut instead. The railway was not built because of the villagers, but somehow they learned how to appropriate it to better their own lives. The railway offered the villagers with a cheap and faster means of traveling. It provided them and those in the environs with different opportunities, which they responded to positively. The railway also bred crime in the villages and environs, which were beyond the control of the British colonial authority. Thank you.
Okay, so hello, I'm Charline Kopf, and I also thank Johan and Robbie for inviting me to this exciting conference. I'm an anthropologist at the University of Oslo and KU Leuven, and my talk today will be about the current repair and maintenance work on the Dakar-Bamako line in Senegal and Mali and the dangers that it involves. So to give you a bit of context, my research focused on the railway workers of the Dakar-Bamako ferroviaire and the Petit Train de Banlieue. So two of the major rail companies running on the line of the Dakar-Niger railway that was completed in 1924 by the French colonial administration. So when I was doing my research from 2019 to 2020, most of the time the trains were suspended and did not work for various reasons. And my aim was to document the effects of the privatization and also failed attempts at renationalizing the railway companies, basically looking at how the workers attempt to cope with the situation, but also retain hope despite the absence of trains or the reduced service. So while in this talk I'll be focusing on the Senegalese suburban train, PTB, and repair practices. So just here, if I go back, the PTB is running on the section that you can see on the map. You had still 3 different companies that were using the tracks. So it was the PTB, the DBF, and the new Train Express Régional. So what you can see here on the last picture, and it just started running actually now this January. And as the name indicates, the Dakar-Bamako provided the transnational service of goods and people from the Senegalese to the Malian capital, and the Petit Train de Banlieue served Dakar's suburbs and ran until Thiès, a city known as La Capitale du Rail. And while the DBF workers had not seen a train pass in 3 years, as you can see here also on the pictures of desolate train station, one is in Kidira in the border region between Senegal and Mali, and the other one is the Bamako train station. The PTB service was also slowly being reduced. So this is a picture from the rail archive in close to the Bamako train station. But the reason for the PTB train service being reduced was that the new train, so the TER, Express Régional, built by French and Turkish companies in Dakar, would soon replace the PTB. So at the same time as the TER was emerging from the ground, the PTB had to interrupt its services for the construction of the new train to be completed. So this is a picture out of the window of the PTB where you can see the walls for the TER being constructed. So this was because the new standard tracks of the TER were being built right next to the PTB. So the end of the PTB seemed imminent and constantly upon us when I was doing my fieldwork with the workers who did not know what future awaited them. And here's so here we're sitting basically in the PTB, and you can see the new protection walls of the TER being built next to it, also fragmenting Dakar's cityscape, and especially the suburbs. So now we'll take the train from Dakar to the train depot of Rufisque, which is a few stops behind Dakar, and where the rest of my talk will also focus on. Because I'm namely going to concentrate on this moment of uncertainty and suspension, demonstrating not only how the PTB railway workers' maintenance and practices kept the train going, but also and above all, focusing on the narratives around dust, so in French, poussière, and debris in the form of ferraille, also meaning scrap metal, that emerged during these moments of repair in the rail depot. And taken together, I argue that these two elements, so dust and debris, become also an archive of labor and provide us with a window into the dangers and risks involved in the workers' practices, but also into the transnational histories of the train coaches that were imported from elsewhere and that evoked for some of the workers also nostalgic memories. So let's start with a moment in the depot of Rufisque, as I said, not far from Dakar. So the moments of repair and maintenance that I shared with the railway workers, they basically taught me how to patch up and repair coaches, prompted discussions on the type of trains that the PTB had relied on in the last years. These had come first from Pakistan and then later India in the context of the Senegalese President Wade's South-South cooperation. But they were often not followed by replacement material, which meant that the workers had to rely on their own knowledge and ingenuity to maintain the wagons. And during one of our lunch breaks, one of the workers, let's call him Mohammed, took out a map of the Indian bogies in the railway depot to explain how, in the past, they managed to replace the axles of the cars without new replacement material. So they had to replace them because you could only reprofile wheels a few times. And initially they had tried ordering it from the Indian company in Kapurthala, where the trains came from in 2006, but it became also too expensive and the shipment would have taken too long. So eager to make the trains run, the workers had found an alternative by using the Pakistani axles from the former coaches, so from ferraille, and modified them so that they would fit the Indian coaches. So as the Pakistani and Indian coaches were not exactly the same, the workers had also to assess which pieces were essential to make the trains work and which ones were not. This was, of course, also a precarious enterprise with substantial risk and responsibility involved. It had led to dangerous accidents and also derailments. But these were also not the only risks that this practice entailed. So these repair practices were often accompanied by talk about dust that engulfed the workers during their work. referring not only to the pollution and the sand that was very present during the time of the year with the Harmattan wind, but also other dangerous material lodged in the old train wagons. As one of the workers, Ibu, explained, pointing to his chest, and to quote him, "At times I have the feeling that something gets stuck deep in my lungs and it might manifest itself later on. At the moment we're okay, but for the asthmatic ones it's more difficult." So starting from these stories of repair and maintenance, but also of health and bodies, I probe further into the origin of the materials the coaches were made from. And between plastering and sanding sessions, the railway worker, Shehu, for example, explained the repairs they were making and gestured to the place where part of the train wall had been torn down, laying bare white and aluminium-style bits and pieces. He explained that asbestos dust is dangerous when exposed, but if left untouched, it is safe. It contains heat and prevents it from getting inside the car. So he's talking about the asbestos insulation, which with its flexible fibers that are resistant to heat, electricity, and corrosion, that has indeed been used across the world for the construction and insulation of roofs, walls, floor tiles, pipes, and other materials, that they were also using at the moment in the depot. However, when the mineral becomes hazardous, when it crumbles, is damaged or in need of repair, and the released dust is inhaled, then it becomes a problem. And although already in the late 19th century, warnings of the toxic effects of asbestos on health, such as lung cancers, were known, it took several decades before the first regulations were put in place. So while a European Union-wide ban took effect in 2005, other countries have been lagging behind. It continues also to be mined in Russia, Kazakhstan, and China, and exported to countries like India, which is the world's largest importer of asbestos. Despite the increase in regulations, enforcement remains patchy across the world, so the use of asbestos is low cost, revealing unequal landscapes of regulation. Moreover, the countries that have banned it still have to deal with the traces and legacies of asbestos that remain in buildings and structures. And that's the case across the world. So both scenarios here apply also to the railway depot in Rufisque. While it is true that the railwaymen still currently use the mineral for small repair works, such as electric conduits, its presence can mainly be traced back to the origins of the machines and the transnational histories of export from India. So aware of the danger involved in being exposed to the asbestos, the workers were hence worried that the repair work made the asbestos crumble. And once I got to know them better, the workers started talking about problems with breathing and vision, accidents that required medical treatment, which were never reimbursed, thereby demonstrating also the industrial abandonment and negligence that they had endured for years. At the same time, the danger surrounding asbestos was also downplayed, being considered less important than more practical concerns of the present. As the head of the labor union explained, "We don't have the time to worry about this." For him, asking someone to test for asbestos would cost a lot of money, which they did not have. Moreover, it would distract from their main concerns, which were, he explained, to make the trains work as best as they could to ensure an income. They did not have an alternative, because they had to make the trains roll for a little longer, as this was the only viable option for them to sustain their families. Any malfunction would provide further cause for the government to argue for the suspension of the PTB and lead to the ultimate replacement of it by the TER, and then result in the workers' unemployment. So while this shows the toxic legacies that the past can carry into the present, talk about debris and replacement material revealed also creative histories tied to the origin of wagons and repair practices. And here the worries about the dangerous dust clouds seem to dissipate, or at least for a certain amount of time. Indeed, the current employees were not the first generation to perform such replacement and repair work. The previous generation of workers had done similar maneuvers to adapt the French trains that were imported before the Indian and Pakistani ones. So the savoir du rail that they refer to, the knowledge of repair practices concerning the railway and what they called also débrouillage, was steeped in the histories of reappropriation and tropicalization practices, as they called it. And here you have pictures from the 20th century, so in the 1980s, that show the transportation of rolling stock from France to Dakar and Douala. And those are what I also call personal archives. So basically magazines that the railway workers had kept and that they showed me on several occasions. And so the first steam locomotives on this line, the Dakar-Niger, were built by the French Batignolles company at the end of the 19th century. And other French companies such as the Weidknecht Frères and Corpé-Louvet supplied further locomotives, followed by the US company Baldwin and Belgian company N. Saint-Pierre. The transfer of rolling stock in general has also a longer history across the world, often denoting a relation between periphery and center, and from wealthier to post-colonial or post-socialist countries. This is not only the case for Africa, but in Europe, for example, Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands regularly pass on their obsolete tramway rolling stock to East European countries, including Romania, Bulgaria, and Ukraine. And here, this is in Thiès, so the capitale du rail, where you have a picture of the Mistral carriages now standing at the workshop, and that was first operating between Paris and Marseille in 1950, then was part of the Trans-Europe Express, and later shipped to Senegal. So these carriages had to be adapted from the standard gauge tracks to the metric ones to serve on the Dakar to Bamako passenger train. And in the stories of the workers, the work of technical translation, adaptation, needed even more efforts, as the French machines were also second-hand material. As the workers explained, infrastructural plans and imported infrastructures themselves had often to be modified and adapted to the local context, i.e. tropicalized, showing similarities to what they were doing with the Indian coaches. In that sense, their repair and maintenance practices were considered a constant work of technical reappropriation and hybridization of foreign machines to the local context. So while on the one hand, many of the workers complained about the fact that they were often forced to work with what others didn't want, so i.e. second-hand, or what they felt was second-class, such as the asbestos-filled coaches from India and Pakistan, the feelings of danger and dependency were also downplayed or accompanied by heroic stories of creation. Indeed, in many of their memories, repair and creation was also celebrated as a successful event. This was, for example, the case with a coach made in Mali. So this is also from a booklet that they showed me. And I mean, it was more a moment of a surprise and contingency that I actually found back the coach there a couple of months later in Mali, in one of the train stations. So when one of the current railway workers announced in the depot, we only repair and fix stuff in Africa, we do not create, a retired switchman contradicted this statement. So amongst the biggest successes that came with the stories of adaptation feats and engineering collaboration, often actually between Senegalese, Malian and French technicians, was this coach made in Mali without any imported material. In Senegal, they had kept the small booklet that documented this endeavor. And the pictures showed the coach and also the 3 engineers that, as they said, had created this first coach at home with our own tools and materials. So here the picture shows 3 young and earnest-looking men standing straight in a row with a caption that read, "The 3 engineers whose determination has enabled our country to put on raids of wagon entirely made in Mali." And from the left to the right, you have also their names, Fodé Traoré, Amadi Diallo, and Tunka Dankogo. And more than a story of creative adaptation and tropicalization, it was also one of passionate ambition and expertise, where the railway workers turn into those heroic figures of technology that the workers enjoyed telling me about. And just another small picture, because we're talking about debris and ferraille, they also made other things out of the scraps that they had in the depot and workshops. And here, for example, they were making irons, chairs, and ovens. And yet, to conclude, because also my time is running out, I see, despite some of the generative effects that such repair practices and use of debris and ferraille may have, the workers were always at pains to highlight that these practices were ultimately unsustainable. As they said, the machines had eaten themselves, les machines se sont mangées, so one coach after another had been used to replace the missing pieces of another coach during these maintenance practices. And to come back to the moment in the depot with which I started, and a moment also that marked my fieldwork while we were patching up wagons, one of the railway workers said to me, "Surely in your countries one does it differently, but our bodies are not less worthy than yours, are they?" And he said this laughing as he connected his body and mine to global inequalities. But with these words, he positioned himself not only in relation to me, a European researcher, but also globally, highlighting the racial geographies that underlie the offshoring of toxicity and secondhand material to so-called developing countries. So for me, these narratives of dust, sediments, and toxic debris that have accumulated over time bind together the bodies of the workers with the machines, thereby highlighting the inequalities inscribed in the material, where the dust becomes a trace of an imperial but also post-colonial past, but also offer the recollections of the past that came with the materials. And I think in that case, also coming back to the discussions that we had this morning, this is kind of a case study about also the necropolitical atmospheres that Aymar was talking about this morning, as well as like the interlaced times with the histories of toxicity, but also post-colonial reappropriation and agency of African workers. And so it's not a celebration of resilience and repair, but also echoes again what Donatien has said about la mort, la vie et la mort. So I think that's it. And those are just some of the Rail et Le Monde newspapers magazines that the railway workers showed to me.
It's a pleasure to respond. And once I've had a moment to do that, I would appreciate some support in managing Q&As in person. Johan can help me with that. It's a pleasure to respond to three really wonderful papers. And I'm going to do it by taking a slightly queer moment and think about the disruption of linear narratives and linear movements in the local. And I want to speak to you about the train station in Johannesburg, and particularly a strangely queer intervention in an archival document. Until very recently, the end of apartheid and the AIDS crisis, the Johannesburg train station was the site for a number of cruising activities where gay sex would happen, and men from all over the city and from the surrounding neighborhoods would come into Johannesburg and use either the cafe or the toilets particularly, or the car park outside in order to cruise and to have sex. And the Gay and Lesbian Archive in Johannesburg, which is a fantastic resource, until very recently was running a tour around the city, a queer tour that you could attend. And I want to read a section of the script that organized the tour that's speaking about the train station. And I want to think about how we can resist the straightness or the linearity of a single narrative. So the script runs the following way. The person who's taking the people around the city comes to the station and they say the following in the script. I think an interesting way to think about Johannesburg is this place of movement, a place of migrants. They continue, this is reflected in the Mammoth Park Station, the name for this park, building on your left. This is Johannesburg Park Station, which is the central railway station for Johannesburg in South Africa, and it's the largest railway station in Africa. Whether this is true, I'm not sure, but on this tour, it's presented as the largest railway station in Africa. Park Station lies on the main Witwatersrand railway line that connects east-west from Krugersdorp to Germiston. Then they continue to tell a really interesting story to bring to life the experience of cruising to the visitors. And the presenter says that in the past, the station was one of the few places where white and black men cruising could meet each other. Because of this double taboo of gay sex and also sex across races, it was a place of heavy police presence. Both of these forms of sex were seen as leading to the moral degeneration of the white race. And then he suggests in this script an interesting anecdote. He says, according to Joe, who's an informant that they worked with, he had come to the station in order to find a sexual partner. He was approached by police, however, who asked where he was going, because he was in a train station, he needed to be going somewhere. And because he couldn't tell the police officers that he was cruising for sex, he replied that he was waiting for a train to Pretoria, the capital city. The officer then guided him to the train and made sure that he actually went to Pretoria and sent him out of the city away from his sexual liaison. And this was a late night train, so he would have been stuck in Pretoria for the rest of the night. Now, as interesting and funny as that story is, what I want to suggest is that something more interesting begins to happen, which is that there's a track change that's entered into the Word document here, that's recorded archivally, in which Mark Gafissa, one of the leading queer historians in South Africa, intervenes. And I also want to take the idea of a track change, which we all know about as the English word in word, and I want to insist on changing tracks, literally. And here we have a change in track where Mark Gafissa says, I don't think that this story is particularly worth telling. Perhaps it's more interesting to talk about the importance for this station for Black men who are coming from the townships. This idea that Johannesburg was seen as a place of promise and possibility, even if it was also a place of oppression. And that's in red in square brackets. This is my provocation, is that I want to suggest that, and I think all three presentations did this, found ways of changing tracks and suggesting that railways are already always kind of queer and already always breaking down, already always in need of repair. And I want to point to four things that maybe could form the basis of discussions. So the first one is the really important political and intellectual work of thinking about maintenance and repair, which, although they may always be orientated towards restoring linear dynamics, in fact, they point to us the already not linear dynamics. And words we've heard today is like breakdown, derailing, disruption, looting, not operating freely, the notion of frictions, the idea that a place could be turned upside down, malfunctions. And I want to ask, one thing that I find interesting is the seduction of a map which shows a railway in context. And while that is a useful mode for explaining sort of where we're looking at, it does seem to seduce one into the notion that railways are more linear and more functional than they may always be, and which is perhaps why the police can't catch criminals who make use of the railways, because they're not able to sort of understand that the railways are not maybe as linear as we want to think. So that's the first one, is to think more about rail maintenance and repair. The second one is a methodological question. And it seems that so much of what we need to think about if we want to understand these non-linear local histories are sorts of ephemeral or mobile archives and mobile forms of data like songs, recording and capturing those, but also incredibly intriguing personal archives. How do we find the track changes that are hidden inside those? And that, I think, is a properly queer question that like people like Munoz and others have looked at, is how do we think of ephemera as evidence, but it's also a very particularly African archival question. The third point is how interestingly all the presentations alerted us to the non-human and the ways in which non-humans are stirred up and become local moments or vectors. We look at soil erosion and the movement of soil, which is amazing. Soil is often much more mobile than we realize. We look at animals that are transporting things to and from, forests that are growing over and around, crops that grow, like groundnuts, for instance, that were not supposed to grow, but then grow. And then the really wonderful figure of dust, which is this wonderful, it's a wonderful medium because it's both atmosphere and it's also earth. And so in a sense, it's hypermobile in itself. So all three presentations, we have like crops and soil and dust and plants and animals. And then the fourth one is, how do we read for more desire or pleasure or sexuality? But, you know, I don't insist here on like a queer reading, like looking for non-normative sex, but so much of the railway is animated by utopian promise, a kind of desire. And I wonder where we can and how we can sensitize ourselves to that kind of desire and sensuality and pleasure. And certainly there's a pleasure in the railway. So those would be my 4 responses. And I don't know if, Johan, if you want to sort of moderate it, or if I can ask who would like to respond to any of those 4 responses: the notion of maintenance, second one of methodology, the third one of non-humans, and the fourth one of desire and pleasure.
Can we do it in the reverse order and start with Charline and then go to Shehu and then go to and then go to David?
I love that.
I'm not sure I find this particularly fair, but
No, I know. That's why I do it.
thank you so much for those wonderful comments. Very thought-provoking, and yeah, I think, like, for example, to take the first comment on railways already always being queer, for me as an anthropologist, I think that was really, I mean, for example, trying to, so I use trajectory as, for example, an outline of my thesis, but the trajectory of, like, where I highlight my own cheminement, so kind of more of a wandering around those tracks and around the sites than now, like, clear-cut following the tracks, which anyway, in my case, the train was not really moving, so it wasn't this, like, clear line that I was trying to follow. And I think I often use also those metaphors of being led off track, which happens a lot when you do fieldwork anyway, because you have this, like, super neat research project and detailed plan of what you're going to do, and then you end up there, you've never been there, you don't know the people. So lots of things change anyway. So I think for me that was, as a methodology, quite wonderful to work with, which also leads me to directly the last point, because I think it connects quite well to that kind of moments, the moments of surprise that you can have, and while you do this kind of cheminement, wandering around and being open to what, for example, your interlocutors tell you, those kind of stories, and then you try to follow those stories that lead you probably to their personal archives, their personal collections or materials that they point out. And I think that's where you can also find this kind of sensuality and pleasure. So it's a pleasure of, like, following those cues or those clues that they give you, while at the same time, I think when you talk about, for example, this the railway and those ideologies around it and the pleasure about the railway, it's also a tricky pleasure to harness, because often at the moment also when you see all this work being done on, like, railways in ruins and European researchers being in awe of those historical ruins, it's always also kind of this, you are in the danger of just projecting your own nostalgia of I don't know what kind of colonial ruins onto some infrastructure that has actually done a lot of harm. So it's always this kind of balancing. Obviously, you have also the post-colonial ideas of, like, of the railway that came with Pan-African ideas and so on, but it's kind of difficult to sometimes balance your own fascination maybe for this infrastructure and what your interlocutors think about it. So I think sensuality, pleasure, and railways, it's a wonderful combination to think about, but it's also a dangerous one sometimes. I don't know if the other ones want to maybe jump in, because now I've been talking for some time.
But maybe one element in response of Jonathan that I would like to throw to Shehu is about, because you also mentioned it in your abstract, Shehu, the use of these songs, so these other kinds of sources that allow us perhaps to change the tracks of how we look at these railways. So Shehu, could you elaborate a bit more on the use of these kind of oral accounts, but also the songs and these kinds of elements that you use to look at these 3 villages? Because what I think is really important in your talk is that we also need to look at these very mundane kind of places along the line that are not the major centers, because we tend to focus on these major centers, and so I'm very happy that you focused on these 3 villages where where a lot of things actually start to change because of the railway line. But so the question is really about the sources and especially the songs that you used for your research. So if you could elaborate a bit.
I use a number of sources. I made use of a very popular Hausa song called Wakar Diga. Wakar Diga was a song that was composed by the Emir of Zaria, who was appointed by the British in 1902, and he died in 1925. The song was composed at the period when the British were planning to build the railway. And this period was a discourse about, the song was a discourse about colonialism. It was a discourse about the psychological effects of the railway. Most of the insights in these songs were you cannot find them in archival records. So the song did give us a lot of insight about the problems or about the confusion that that the whole thing about the railway created in northern Nigeria, because the emir himself, because the realization about the confusion that was in the land made him to visit the construction site in order to assure people that all was well, that they should be calm and participated in the railway. I don't know if you are getting my point. So the song was a very important song. It gave us a lot of insight about the psychological impact, as well as the impact of this technological transfer that the British was doing during this period. So it gave us a lot of insight. So I think looking at other sources that people really use, like songs, poems, will go a long way in enriching one's work. This kind of sources are really being used. I also gave example of one of the European travel account I consulted. This the European account was written by a European traveler who visited northern Nigeria in 1911. That was at a time when the railway, the train was still a novel, So the European account gave us a lot of insight about the reactions of people towards the railway. So the account shows that the reactions to the railway, that there was mixed reactions of fear and wonder. Contrary to what we read in the literature, that people appropriated the railway immediately, this account shows otherwise. It shows that the idea to even appropriate the railway was something that was planned over a period of time. So I think using this type of sources will go a long way in improving one's work.
Okay, thank you very much. So John, a very brief response.
Exactly. I just wanted to say to David, that even if we can deny, even if we don't have to take on board that soil and water and groundnuts and dust are actors, we could certainly agree that they are moving a lot more than people want them. We want to, that they are mobile and interfering and so much more complicated than we want to take account of. So that's all I wanted to say, is that they certainly seem to be moving. That surely must be uncontroversial to most people.
Okay.
I hope so.
I think this is a conversation that we can take for hours on, but I want to really give also people in the room the possibility of asking a question. So is there a question? I have one question.
Merci. Yeah, so Miss Kopf, you speak French?
Oui.
So I will do it in French. C'est plus spécifique. Bon, oui. J'ai retrouvé un peu de cette émission fabuleuse avec laquelle j'ai grandi juste avant, envoyé spécial sur France 2. Le train pas comme les autres. cette émission où on pouvait rêver de prendre le Pékin Orient Express, aller en Inde, aller en Pakistan, aller d'est en ouest, going with the West, be in a train and reading to Hemingway and beatnik and blah 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 and be somebody. Yeah, c'est ce qui est assez chouette. But on peut aussi voir le train de ce film fabuleux où on voit pour la première fois au-dessus d'un train un homme noir, Sydney Poitier, se battre avec Tony Curtis au-dessus du train. On se rend compte que c'est quelque chose d'assez fondamental. And then, yeah, Sydney Poitier beat the white guy, Tony Curtis, and Tony Curtis is about to fall outside. And of course, this movie was in 1956, donc en plein révolution des droits civils. Donc évidemment, tout le monde dans la salle se demande qu'est-ce qui va se passer. Oh my God, Tony Curtis is about to die. But Sydney Poitier is a really good black guy. So il va tendre la main to save Tony Curtis. And it was all in a train. So I want to asking you, what is for the engineer working in the Senegalese route, what is thinking about le rachat en tout cas, Bolloré Art Logistique, la vente actuelle à MSCS, qu'est-ce que vont être pour le travailleur qui répare les trains, quelles vont être les conséquences pour lui au jour le jour par rapport à ses conditions de vie? Est-ce que ça va s'améliorer? Est-ce que c'est des choses dans lesquelles on parle? Donc évidemment, je n'ai aucune idée de quand vous avez mené ces visites, mais c'est une actualité qui, de façon réaliste et pragmatique, incombe un peu à votre analyse des conditions de travail de ces travailleurs qui, je suppose, ne sont pas de ceux qui seront dans le train, ni dans le TER, et aussi, autre sous-question, pourquoi avoir choisi ces lignes de train-là et peut-être pas le projet de métro qui va avoir lieu à Dakar là, en 2023-2024. Voilà, qu'est-ce qui vous a guidé dans ces pistes-là et pas dans l'autre? Et oui, autre chose aussi, puisque par rapport à votre allusion de vie et mort du professeur Diboué, qui je suppose n'est pas forcément à comparer avec l'intervention fondamentale du professeur Nignesi. Le train, c'est quelque chose qui ne s'arrête pas, hein, comme l'a dit Nignesi. C'est quelque chose qui avale et qui mange. Et le seul souci, donc parmi ce mot qu'on appelle la résilience, et là je fais référence to the Nigerian professor, to this beautiful song. So of course, the song about the Black Betty is not the same as when you sing Black Betty as the train in USA, and when you sing Tugudu, 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 Congolese rumba, listen to the train. Of course, it's beautiful, it's nice, those resilience kind of stuff, but it did not explain us what was the consequence of that train. So, du coup, ce concept de résilience, qui est culturel, les conséquences de ce que le train amène, ça fait de très belle musique, ça fait du gospel, des work songs, ça fait de très belles choses, mais ce n'est pas ça qui permet à un environnement de survivre. Voilà, comme commentaire. Merci pour votre écoute.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, beaucoup de questions, super fascinantes. Alors, juste pour commencer avec la première, donc moi j'ai fait mes recherches entre 2019 et 2020. Donc avec le rachat de Bolloré, je vais prendre l'exemple peut-être du TER et du PTB, parce que je pense que ce sont un peu les mêmes dynamiques. Donc le TER, il a été construit donc avec des financements turcs et français, et donc ce sera la SNCF et la RATP qui vont manager le train. Et en fait, le problème avec le PTB, c'est aussi que tous les travailleurs ont toujours espéré pouvoir faire partie du TER, et il y avait aussi ces promesses-là. Mais d'un autre côté, quand j'ai parlé quand j'ai fait des entretiens aussi au sein de ces institutions, et aussi d'APIX, qui est le maître, ou alors ceux qui mettent en œuvre les constructions, ils m'ont aussi dit on veut des employés moins syndicalisés. Et parce que donc moi j'ai fait aussi pas mal de travail de terrain avec les syndicats, et donc c'était tout à fait un autre type de cheminots qui avait au PTB et au DBF, donc vraiment qui ont grandi dans une culture de syndicalisme ferroviaire assez intense, que les cheminots qui n'étaient pas des cheminots, mais plutôt des jeunes qui venaient de finir leurs éducations, ou alors des enseignants qui qui n'ont pas trouvé d'emploi et qui se sont fait embaucher au TER. Donc je pense que là, par exemple, une fois que le TER vient de commencer, le PTB probablement il ne marchera plus pendant très longtemps, et je pense pas qu'ils ont encore une longue vie de cheminot devant eux. Et pourquoi est-ce que donc je pense que c'est un peu la même dynamique maintenant avec Bolloré et l'exemple que vous avez donné. Et c'était vraiment, même quand j'étais, et c'est aussi un peu pour ça, pour cette raison-là que je suis venue à ce thème de sujet, parce que j'avais fait ma thèse de master sur la construction du nouveau musée des civilisations noires à Dakar, qui a été construit par les Chinois. Mais en arrivant là-bas, ça c'était en 2017, il y avait plein de monde qui m'ont toujours dit il y a le TER qui va être construit, il va que mener à cette nouvelle ville futuristique de Diamniadio, qui va aussi être construite. Pourquoi est-ce qu'ils ne rénovent pas le long chemin de fer Dakar-Bamako? Donc c'est un peu ce questionnement qui m'a intéressée. Et je pense que là, je peux aussi répondre donc à votre troisième question, où vous avez dit, par exemple, qui avale, qui mange, qui avale. Donc le train en relation avec ce que le professeur Donatien a dit. Moi, ce que je voulais dire avec la mort, la vie, la mort, et en me référant à ça, c'était plutôt que, et aussi pour les images que je montrais, c'est qu'il y a des endroits le long du chemin de fer qui maintenant sont assez... Il n'y a plus grand-chose. Et donc il y a plein de villages qui, en fait, ont déménagé, qui étaient le long du chemin de fer, qui ont déménagé vers la route. Donc je vois aussi ce que vous voulez dire, mais c'était un peu à ça, oui, à ces situations-là que je faisais mes références. Ouais.
So thank you, Jonathan, thank you, Shehu, thank you, David, for following us online. It was a pleasure having you here.